This is part 3 of the chapter 3 lecture notes, and I was finishing up with I was talking with you about the phospholipid bilayer that forms the plasma membrane of cells, and explaining what the word amphipathic means, and that just means that there is a hydrophobic and a hydrophilic part of the molecule. All right, another type of lipid is a steroid. And steroids can be hormones like testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, these sex hormones. They can also be hormones like cortisol, which is the stress hormone. But you notice that, and cholesterol is the precursor for all steroids. So you notice that steroids have a 4-ring structure. So the difference between cholesterol and cortisol and testosterone and estrogen is very small. Steroids are hydrophobic. They're lipids, so they're hydrophobic. They're nonpolar. They're insoluble in water, just like all lipids. Phospholipids are the only lipids that have a hydrophilic component, a component that is soluble in water. But lipids in general are insoluble in water. Cholesterol is the most common steroid. It's synthesized in the liver. Pay very close attention to this part, by the way. Synthesized in the liver. It is the precursor to other hormones such as testosterone and estradiol or estrogen and progesterone. It is the precursor to vitamin D. And it's the precursor to bile salts, which are found in bile that help emulsify fat. Then we're going to move to, for the lipids, for a review, we had saturated fats, unsaturated fats, so fats and oils, and we had waxes, steroids, and phospholipids. Now we're going on to proteins, which are the most abundant organic molecules. And they have many, many functions. They can have regulatory functions. In other words, there are proteins that serve as enzymes, which help regulate or speed up chemical reactions. Regulatory functions is probably referring primarily to hormones. Now, hormones can be steroid hormones, or they can also be protein hormones or amino acid hormones. So a hormone, for example, called insulin, which helps regulate our blood sugar or blood glucose levels, is a regulatory, it's a protein hormone. Proteins also help form our body structure, and they have protective functions. Antibodies are proteins. Antibodies help with our immune system. And then we have transport proteins, and we have proteins that are toxins. One transport protein, for example, is hemoglobin that helps transport oxygen in the blood. So let's look at enzymes first. Enzymes are catalysts. They are chemicals that speed up other chemical reactions, and they're always proteins. An enzyme is always a protein catalyst. So some enzymes function in catabolism. They're called catabolic enzymes because catabolism is the word for the breakdown reactions in the body, the hydrolysis reactions. Some are anabolic because anabolism is the word for the synthesis reactions or the building reactions in the body. So these are enzymes that help to build more complex molecules. And then catalytic enzymes are the ones that speed up the rate of a chemical reaction. They catalyze chemical reactions. So we have enzymes that are proteins. We have transport proteins. Hemoglobin is one. Hemoglobin carries oxygen and a small amount of carbon dioxide throughout the blood. And then we have structural proteins. There's keratin. There's collagen found in your bones and your skin. Keratin is also found in your skin, particularly the outer layers of your skin, um, to help protect it. Actin is one of the proteins that helps your muscles contract. There are protein hormones, for example, insulin. There's another one called thyroxine, which is thyroid hormone. Um, and then there are immunoglobulins, which we also call, another word for immunoglobulins is antibodies. And these function in defense. And then there are contractile proteins. Actin is listed as a structural and a contractile protein. Actin and myosin together cause muscles to contract. And then there are storage proteins. Albumin, which is a storage protein found in eggs, it forms the egg white. And I'm going to have to look up leg mace storage proteins. I'll get back to you on that. That's one I haven't heard before. In fact, let me write that down. Leg mace. Because that could be a typo, or it could just be something. In biology, you're always coming across things in textbooks that weren't in the last textbook that you taught out of. So I'll get back to you on leg may. Amino acids are the monomers of protein. So there are 20 different amino acids. And so they are the building blocks for proteins. Amino acids contain a central carbon, and then they contain a hydrogen group. They contain an amino group, which is a nitrogen and 2 hydrogens. And then they contain a carboxyl group. This is the acid part. This is sometimes called carboxylic acid. So the carboxyl group has a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, single bonded to an oxygen and a hydrogen. So the R group is the part that can be any atom or group of atoms. It is the side chain. It's what makes amino acids different from each other. There are 20 different R groups for the 20 different amino acids. The R groups will determine what type of amino acid that it is, whether it's nonpolar, whether it's polar, and if it's nonpolar, of course, it's insoluble in water. If it's polar, then it's soluble in water. And it can also have a charge. It can be an amino acid that's negatively charged or positively charged. But these R groups determine the characteristics of the amino acid. Essential amino acids, just like essential fatty acids, are ones you have to get through your diet. There's not a whole lot on the essential amino acids, so I'll just tell you, you can get all of your essential amino acids if you eat meat. If you eat eggs, if you eat meat, these will provide all of the essential amino acids. Vegetarians can get their essential amino acids, but vegans sometimes cannot, because vegetarians will drink milk, but vegans won't. So if you're a vegan, you have to get all the essential amino acids, you have to have a grain, plus you have to have a legume. Legumes are like beans and nuts. So you have to have, for example, a lot of vegans eat rice and beans. That's a staple of a vegan diet. And so that's an example of having a meal with grains and legumes. But if you don't eat meat or animal products, then to get your essential amino acids, you must eat grains and legumes together. When amino acids link together by a chemical bond, that linkage is called a peptide bond. In fact, the polymers of amino acids are called peptides, and then when the peptides change shape, they undergo complex shape changes. They are then called proteins. So that's where we get the word peptide bond. A polypeptide is a chain of amino acids. And then a protein is a polypeptide that has undergone shape changes to where it has a unique structure and function. Proteins have very complex shapes, and it is their shape that determines their function. You can watch this video, and this is slide number 41. So you can go to that and click on that video link and watch protein synthesis. But we will learn protein synthesis in detail when we get to our chapters on DNA. Now, the shape of proteins is important. Proteins have 4 levels of structure. They have their primary structure, which is just the sequence of amino acids. It's simply the amino acid sequence. And then they have their secondary structure, and that's, you can take the primary structure and either make it into a helix like DNA, a spiral helix, or a pleated structure, kind of like those paper fans that you may have made when you were a little kid. So it can either be a helix or a pleated sheet for the secondary structure. And the tertiary structure is the final 3-dimensional shape that is produced. And then the quater, that should be an R in there. Quaternary structure is not found in every protein, but a protein that has quaternary structure is just more than one tertiary structure chemically combined. So in other words, you would have a protein that has several subunits. Hemoglobin is an example of a protein that has a quaternary structure. So this is showing you primary structure. Primary structure is simply the sequence of amino acids, and these are abbreviations for amino acids: glycine, isoleucine, valine, glutamine, I don't know all of them, alanine, cysteine, serine, so tyrosine, leucine. So all of these, the sequence of the amino acid is the primary structure. And then this page just tells you that the amino acid sequence comes from the DNA code. So if the DNA code determines which amino acids are in the protein in which sequence, if there is a mutation in the DNA code, you can have a mutation in the protein. So one example is sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia. And what happens is there are 600 amino acids in hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein that carries oxygen on the red blood cells. So normal hemoglobin has, at position 7, has an amino acid called glutamic acid or glutamate. And if glutamate is in there, then you have a normal shape of hemoglobin, and your red blood cells have a normal round shape, and there's no problems. But if there is a mutation in the DNA code, so that now instead of having glutamate or glutamic acid in the 7th position, you have valine, then you're going to have red blood cells that are sickle shaped, and you will end up with sickle cell disease. And here is an example of someone who has sickle cell disease. Some of the red blood cells are okay, but this is one that's sickle shaped, several of them that are sickle shaped. So what happens when they're sickle shaped is that they tend to clot, and a lot of the symptoms of sickle cell anemia, the pain and the episodes that they have, the fatigue, they're really very easily fatigued, happens because the blood has a hard time traveling through the blood vessels. All right, so that was an example of what can happen when the primary structure is, there's a mutation in the primary structure. So primary structure is simply the sequence of amino acids. The secondary structure is either going to be that primary structure formed into an alpha helix,